Today we're going to talk about demons, and I know there's going to be a couple of you that go, I don't want to have this conversation. Why does Kerry need to talk about this? Why do we need to look at the dark? You don't need to. If it's not your cup of tea, don't drink it. If this conversation triggers you, you know the deal. Go to my channel. There's so many other videos raising your frequency and the beauty of what's going on in the world right now. If that's your point of focus, go focus there, because it's beautiful. It's not wrong. It's not right to have this conversation. But for some of you, it's going to be a very important one. For some of you, it's going to answer questions like, how do I protect myself? What do I do with demons? How do I get rid of them, ward them off, and why are they actually here in the first place? That's a huge question. So I want to go into a little bit of the history of creation, because that's going to lay the foundation for understanding. And of course, this is a big topic. So if you've got questions, I'm sure you're going to. If you've got questions in the comment section, please, by all means, leave them. And maybe I'll do some follow-up videos. This could be a really good series, but let's just see how this video goes. Let me get through just the overview, and hopefully I can squeeze it all into this conversation with you. So overview, we need to talk about creation. I want you to think about creation as a cake. And yes, I did say that we're going to think of creation as a cake. I am fasting right now. I'm going to do a 5-day fast. And so I'm pretty much in that place in my mind right now where my hunger hasn't switched off. And yeah, everything's about food right now. Interestingly enough, we are going to be talking about addictions too, because of course food is one of them. It's one of the reasons why I love fasting, because it breaks that consumer addiction cycle. But anyway, there is actually a video I did on fasting. If you are interested in it, I will leave it in the description box below. God source creator consciousness. Let's start there. God source creator consciousness, the supreme creator of all that is. Think of ingredients of a cake put together that form this beautiful, delicious, sweet indulgence. Maybe you don't like cake, but just pretend you do for this example. Now, each individual ingredient on its own, you got the butter, you got the eggs, you got the sugar, you got the vanilla extract, you got all of these individual ingredients on their own. Maybe you got chocolate because you're making a chocolate cake, whatever it is, all of these individual ingredients on their own. This was the question of God's source creator. How do I become more? How does that cake become more delicious? How does that cake expand itself? How does that cake become more than the best cake that already there is? Well, you go into the individual ingredients, and what if the butter could become more buttery, and the sugar could somehow become more sugary, and the flour could become something lighter and more fluffy? How do we break apart the cake into individual ingredients and then allow these individual ingredients to expand themselves? This is kind of like what we did when we came into creation. We took the light and the dark that together was our wholeness, the cake, so to speak, and we separated them out. And we separated them out knowing this is light separated from dark and dark separated from light. But dark got addicted to the power, to the illusion of the power, because that's all it could be. Dark became arrogant and superior in its separation and said, wait a minute, I could become more than that cake. I could become an entire banquet. I could become an entire feast. I want that. I don't want to be a cake anymore. So darkness wanted in its arrogance to become more than its original wholeness. But you can understand the flaw in that plan. And I'm going to give you a couple other reasons why that plan is very flawed. You can understand the flaw in that plan because it's now one ingredient. It's one ingredient. It's never going to create anything that represents wholeness or could even compete with wholeness. But that's okay. Darkness is arrogant. Darkness isn't necessarily wise. It's supremely clever, though. Highly intelligent, but not necessarily wise. So this was the role of darkness. And of course, darkness grows the light. Darkness was needed by the light as much as light was needed by the darkness. And to antagonize each other, the process of antagonizing always creates growth. So this was very much in alignment with the original concept of creation. But that plan got hijacked along the way. Beings like demons and archons and reptilians came in. And you know, the best way that I want to describe a demon to you is if you take the word monad. Monad is, in case you haven't heard it before, the monad is the oversoul. It's the sum totality of you. It's the wholeness of you. So it's the part of you that still exists in God's source consciousness. The demon wanted to, and this is a Kyriism that I'm giving you, wanted to demonadify itself, to detach itself from the wholeness of the monad and live in that perpetual detachment. But not only can it never now merge with the other ingredients to make a bigger cake or banquet or feast, it's always going to be lacking. It's always going to be depleted. There's a much bigger flaw in that plan, and that is darkness lost its ability to create. The moment it became separate, it lost its ability to create. And when it lost its ability to create, because it's the light that creates, it needed a food source, a fuel source. But it couldn't ingest light in the form of the very high frequency light, the love and the joy. This was going to fry its circuitry. It needed to ingest energy. So it's not needing food. It needs to ingest energy from a being of light. It must be an energy of density that a being of light has set off. So it could be fear or anger or rage or despair or grief or whatever it is. It must contain density so that it's in a form that the demon can digest, which is, of course, why they initiate and instigate so much so that they have a food source. If you watched my video, I will link it in the video description box. If you watched my video on the collapse of the underworld, you'll know that the collapse of the underworld was a result of where we are in the ascension process. The energies begin to push up from the lower realm. So what this means is there's no more room left for this level of darkness on the planet. The underworld collapsed and is essentially being pushed up to the surface. This is why we're rubbing shoulders with demons right now, and I know that that's uncomfortable for a lot of you, but it is the truth. When we rub shoulders with demons, so to speak, it is because we're not in their world, they're in ours. That is not comfortable for them at all, but that is nonetheless where they find themselves. They find themselves surrounded by a very different diet. In other words, the light is becoming lighter and less accessible. The dark is becoming more prolific, and remember, they can't eat their own kind because they can't eat darkness. Darkness doesn't have the spark of creation that light does, so it doesn't ever satisfy them. Not that they're ever satisfied. They are locked into perpetual consumerism. They need to perpetually eat. They're perpetually exhausted, perpetually miserable. They're enslaved. They don't have free will, autonomy, independence, sovereignty. When they chose darkness, that was the last choice that they could make. They lost their free will. So these beings are miserable, and many of them are exhausted and tired, and they just want to go home. Many of them made agreements with the light to hold the darkness so that the light could become lighter. They're exhausted once again, and they just want to go home. And of course, many of them forgot themselves in this grand playground of forgetfulness. Many of them forgot themselves so completely that they don't even know that they want to go home. Nothing can thrive in perpetual misery. They're locked into the ultimate codependent relationship. Think about it. They hate the light. They resent the light, but they need the light. They need to eat from and feed from the consciousness that we exude. Again, remember, it's just the dense consciousness that they can ingest, but nonetheless, they are totally dependent on the light, and never could it be truer to say you are what you eat. Because as much as they're eating misery, despair, anger, all that kind of stuff, as much as that's what they're ingesting, that energy comes from a being of light. So at some level, they are eating light. At some level, they are taking in the very thing that they don't want and that they don't want to be and that they really want to be separate from. As I described these demonic beings to you, and I said to you, they don't have sovereignty, they're enslaved, consumers, exhausted, As you heard, oh, and by the way, many of them addicted. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's a huge one. They're absolutely addicted to their misery. Now, as I described the state of being that demons live in, did you not think to yourself, gosh, that sounds a little bit like humanity? Are we the demons? Are we? No, we're not. And the reason why there's a parallel is because we're both, we and the demons. And when I say we, I'm talking about third dimensional humanity. And third dimensional humanity was the humanity you were born to. We have both been separate from light. Them by choice and rejection thereof, us by amnesia and forgetfulness. The separation from light is what creates the addiction and the misery and the exhaustion and the depletion and so on. So no, we're not demons, but there's definitely similarities, and that's the reason why. So we can talk about, how do we deal with them? Do we banish them and shame and judge and berate them, which of course is just continuing their legacy, or do we forgive and welcome them and tell them that they're beautiful? No, I've given you two extremes, and the answer is neither of those. There is always a middle way. And the middle way is best explained to you if I answer the question, what do we do with these demons? How do we get rid of them? How do we protect ourselves from them? Because they can be a menace in our energy field. They can really... See, the thing that we got to know about them is they don't invade. It's not the nature of darkness to outwardly invade. They're way too sneaky. The nature of darkness is to infiltrate. So they don't invade, they infiltrate. This is how they infiltrated the angelic realms. And yes, that's another conversation. The fallen angels, so to speak. I'm not going to go into that in this video. But that is their nature. And that's what they attempt to do with beings of light. They attempt to infiltrate your thoughts, your thinking, through programming, through all of these various avenues, of course, to keep you enslaved, to keep you as an available food source to them. When you raise your frequency, I cannot stress this enough. When you raise your frequency, you become the light. And when you become light at enough of a vibratory level, which means enough of your purity, because that's where we are right now. We're at a level of growth and consciousness wherein our purity of essence, our purity of being, our overall goodness is what will protect us. It is not the shielding and the banishing and the berating and the shaming and the hating and the sending ideas to them about, oh, you're loved and I'm going to change you and I'm going to heal you, or I'm going to banish you for eternity. It's none of those things. It is simply to make yourself impenetrable. It is to make yourself a vibratory field of light. There's a recent video that I put up about how protected you are, and what protects you is your light. The online community that I have, we've dealt with this numerous times about masterclasses on how to work with the release of demons from our energy field. So this is something that you need to do, but it's not about banishing. It's not about resistance, because anything that you do and the root of it is resistance, it's going to become an entanglement. You will never be free of the thing you resist. So it's not about how do I resist, how do I push back? It's about how do I step into a state of neutrality? And from that state of neutrality, how do I raise my energy where I become a field of light consciousness that they cannot reach, cannot touch? And yes, eventually they will go back home. Eventually they will be reabsorbed back into the Godhead. Many of them sooner rather than later. Many of them are so exhausted, as I said before, they can't wait to leave and go home. Not all of them, but there's a lot of them in that state at the moment. So when I said to you earlier, we're kind of rubbing shoulders with them right now. We're living in the same energy field. At no point does that mean you're in harm's way. It means life for them got a lot more difficult. If this was where humanity was at a very ignorant, dense, low frequency state of being, okay, different story. We would have then really, really suffered and really, really battled. But they're in this plane of existence as one last stop before they reach the end of their road. And when they reach the end of their road, they're being given a question, and the question is really, are you going to grow, which means to ultimately be reabsorbed back into the thing that you hate, which is light, or are you going to be completely exterminated, which means to return to space dust, to return to a being that has no history and essentially just light itself, a part of creation that gets reabsorbed back into the Godhead, no longer as an individual separate ingredient, but just as a part of God's source created consciousness. So for these beings, it spells death either way, but it's not death. It is the death to a way of being. Let me know in the comment section, did this raise more questions than answers? I hope not. Let me know. And of course, let me know if you'd like to hear more videos on this topic. I am going to leave a video for you up here. It's the recent one. I spoke about it earlier. It's the recent one about how protected you are. I think if you haven't watched that video, you really, really need to, because you need to know what protects you. It is your light. It is your goodness. It is your frequency. Lots of love, everyone. Bye-bye for now.